Thank you very much, Carl. It's a pleasure to be back and have one more session. You know, this is the 5th year that I've attended this, and I said at the conclusion of the first year how much I felt I got, how much more I got actually from the intellectual input and the discussions, the agreements, the disagreements, than I felt I contributed. I've come back every year since, and that's been true of each and every one. And I want to thank Jay and Carl and Arun and all of their colleagues for making this the most productive type of conference I get to attend each year. And believe me, I attend a few others. I was a little intimidated with this particular session when I saw how it was shaping up, because it's a big subject that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to try to keep my comments very, very succinct, because these speakers will convey to you something that was an eye-opener to me this time. And one of the highlights, what I began to see last night when we had Dan Richter with two of our speakers, both Gitane and Lourdes, Dr. Melgar, I began to realize how much dialogue is already going on between Canada and Mexico on the big issues, the big win-win potential of a highly interactive North America. And I walked away last night thinking, I'm wondering just when we may catch up. Somewhat understandably, with our election going on and very little discussion of many of the issues that were covered yesterday or today, or especially even on Friday night, we're not there yet. But it's very, very encouraging to me to see how that dialogue is unfolding between our partner to the north and our partner to the south. Because 30 years ago, as an analyst, a real visionary told me, someday we'll evolve to a true North American integrated energy concept. And it's been a long time coming, but what I learned in the last 24 hours, it's more in the offing than I realized when I was driving up here. So against that backdrop, I want to use the organizing approach that we had from Mark, which is largely going to be questions and answers. I'll get it started. But having heard such a great presentation yesterday by two of our speakers, I want to give a little bit of opportunity to Michael and Jeff to kick this off, and then we'll go to Q&A and try to share with you in the next 38 minutes or so just why the big idea of that this is a win-win for all involved, especially as we deal with the challenges of climate change, and as we presume, and I think correctly, that the cyclical downturn has only temporarily changed the economics of unconventionals, and that the recovery that I think is coming rather imminently, later this year, next year at the latest, a real change back to a workable situation, not $100 oil, not $13 gas, but workable situations. For that opportunity is the backdrop against which we'll be discussing this. Michael, could you give us a few of your thoughts, having just joined the panel?
Thank you, Tom. Happy to. My first thought, I'd like to simply echo your appreciation and thanks to Jay Precourt and everybody who has put energy and time and effort into organizing this. I've worked on these issues night and day for the last 8 years. I learned a lot here in the last 2 days. There's a great discussion, and it's an important discussion for a better energy future for North America. So thank you for organizing it, and thank you for the invite. Talk briefly a little bit of context, and then talk about some next steps in terms of advancing those opportunities that Tom was just describing. You can lose sight, big fights, you can lose sight of big pictures. I think the big fight on KXL lost sight of some big picture elements around the North American energy relationship. It's very deep, it's very positive, and it's getting deeper. I'll just give you one quick stat. On the Canada-US part of that North American relationship, there are 100 points of important contact across the Canada-US border. Right now, today, there are 70 major oil and gas pipelines operating. moving oil and gas in both directions across the U.S. border, and there were 30 interconnections of the grid between Canada and the United States. There's a similar dynamic in terms of Mexico and the United States, but I won't speak to that. I'll leave that to Jeff. And so there's a big relationship already. It's structural, it's deep, and it's key to the current and future energy prospects of North America. At this point in, I'd say, the history of the North American energy relationship, there is a unique opportunity to deepen that relationship, and it's driven by three big changes that are happening in a coincident manner. The first is a change that's sweeping across all of North America. It's the unconventional revolution. The new opportunities that have happened and will be happening as a result of the shale revolution, the fracking, the directional drilling, oil sands in Canada. That's across North America. We heard about it a lot in the last couple days. I won't go into it, but it is a game changer that's continuing to change the game. The second is one that is really the Mexican story and the amazing reforms coming out of Mexico that, quite frankly, nobody could have predicted or Mexico is generating results that are above and beyond the expectation that I think any informed observer had a few years ago. Tremendous opportunities emerging. And the third is coming out of Canada. And I think Colin Robertson made this point, elections matter, and in terms of in Canada and energy policy, they've recently mattered a lot. You have seen, as a result of a change in government in the province of Alberta and at the federal level, a complete change in Canada's approach to climate change. The country has an ambitious agenda to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It went into Paris and COP21 and with a very different approach, was very proactive and very constructive, and is working within Canada to create and to make an ambitious climate change plan a positive driver of economic growth, because it will enable us to actually develop our energy industry, because there's confidence by Canadians and by foreign markets that foreign customers that the development of the Canadian energy industry is an environmentally responsible development that's consistent with a positive outcome on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And the Canadian government's moving at speed, working literally around the clock with the province of Alberta and the other provincial governments in Canada to forge together an ambitious plan to bring greenhouse gases down, anchored on carbon pricing as a key element, with a massive investment in clean technology. So that work is unfolding at speed. There's a commitment that within 90 days of the Paris meeting, that there will be a meeting of all of the leaders of the provincial and federal government to have a major delivery of a milestone on that plan. That's the context. Those three big changes in North America are the context within which some next steps are being taken in North American cooperation. Within 2 weeks, February 11th and 12th, my minister, the Minister of Natural Resources, responsible for energy in Canada, has invited his American and Mexican colleagues to join him in Winnipeg in February, it's a very brisk thing, and a really solid 2-day agenda of working through concrete work elements to advance the partnership that started out in Mexico last spring. It's a working group on energy and climate change, and I don't want to scoop my boss or our Mexican or American counterparts' bosses here in terms of what they're going to be achieving exactly in 2 weeks, but I would look for a significant outcome in terms of advancing collaborative work across the three governments on energy information, so we actually map out and understand that what the North American energy infrastructure is. There's some interesting information gaps, but moving on all of the key things to create a cleaner energy system that's consistent with our climate change obligations, moving on renewables and clean electricity, building a cleaner electricity grid across North America, advancing carbon capture and storage, working on oil and gas emissions, particularly in the unconventional, working on clean tech innovations that drive across the whole realm of energy production. Look forward to some significant outcomes there. And that will be a stepping stone to a broader North American relationship that's going to build over the coming months. There are some key bilateral meetings of leaders. Prime Minister of Canada is going to have a state visit in Washington quite soon. There's other bilateral meetings, and I look forward to a significant and I believe positive North American Leaders Summit in Canada later this year that will advance a range of shared interest among the three countries, but there will almost certainly be a significant element around clean energy and climate change there. And last thing I'd say is that if you look at where does this take you in terms of real results, this will enable a stronger integrated energy infrastructure among the three countries that's cleaner, more efficient, and more resilient to the big, nasty surprises that keep coming up in the global energy system. And anybody who thinks there aren't going to be more surprises, they're dreaming. There will be.
We touched on that yesterday a bit.
I'd say the second thing is that it's actually going to lead to a pretty major shared commitment on clean tech research and development, because Canada, the United States, and Mexico were 3 of the 21 partners that joined the Mission Innovation Collaboration that was established in Paris. That's a commitment, and interestingly enough, all the big emitters are there. China is there, India is there, Brazil is there. It's part of the new global architecture to really get at and make progress on greenhouse gas emissions. The Mission Innovation Collaboration, Tom Riker talked about it a bit yesterday. All these governments have committed to double the public R&D on clean tech over the next 5 years. But with it, very importantly, is the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, 21 billionaires, essentially, who have committed to work together to create private funds that work beside the government investments in R&D. So you have a leveraging that really drives the clean tech revolution, which creates economic opportunity and low-cost emission reductions around the world. And there's some pretty serious, Bill Gates, Jack Ma, Ratan Tata, and a whole bunch of very serious business leaders around the world are joining governments in this. The three partners of North America are going to be our energetic leaders in that initiative. And I think you will see that shape some of the cooperation that is coming to a theater near you in the North American context. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff, could you add a thought or two? We heard some yesterday on this, the interconnectivity of electricity. And could you share with us your perspective on where we're going with that? We know it already exists in California to Baja, but could you take just a couple minutes on that, and then we'll go to questions. And for those of you who have questions in the audience, do pass them up. I'll do my best to get some of those into our time as well.
Sure. It's been a really dramatic reform that we've done on the electricity side in Mexico. And before I say anything about it, I think most of you don't know who's responsible for us having the reform. We had a really good Undersecretary of Electricity, a leader who pushed through. This was originally just going to be an oil and gas reform, and she was able to put electricity on the agenda. She's now the Undersecretary of Oil and Gas. So my old boss, really, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that she can claim responsibility that our reform went into electricity, as well as hydrocarbons. So it's been a really big reform. We had 2 problems in the electric sector in Mexico that we weren't solving. One was cost. One was we weren't meeting our clean energy goals. We had a goal of getting to 35% clean energy in 2024 and 50% in 2050, but we weren't advancing on a path to get there. Now, part of the solution is opening up the market and integrating participation from the US, Canada, and the rest of the world. We did the diagnosis. Why weren't we advancing and getting costs down and getting more clean energy in? We saw really the problem was we were working still in a central planning environment. The state, through the electric monopoly and through the Minister of Energy, was the only person who could do expansion plans, the only person who could decide where to put new plants. And especially in the renewable field, you need to get a lot of different hands involved. These are a lot of different technologies, smaller projects. In order to meet the goals, you need to have dozens or hundreds of projects going at once. So central planning isn't the solution. We needed to switch over to a market. Now, the market that we've decided to implement is very similar to the markets that we've got in the U.S. and Canada, and that's by design. These are markets that are familiar for all of the generation companies, the developers. So in the old days, it was another world, it was another planet to come into Mexico and build a project. Now, these are the same rules. People who have money to invest, who have technology to bring down, human capital to bring down, can read our rules. They are in Spanish, but they're in the same language once you get it into English. So the harmonization of the rules, the business practices is, I think, the biggest part of the integration, even though it's not physically an interconnection. Now, the interconnections are another part that's going to come out of this because now there are a lot of new ways where private companies can go in and propose the projects and invest in the projects their own capital, where in the old days only the electric company, only the state could do it. So we have 5 interconnections with the U.S. We have a long way to catch up to Canada's interconnections. But now that the barriers are down, it's going to be easier to happen.
What hit me is that the focus and the attention you're giving to this comes about in no small part because your cost structure, you were at a real disadvantage on the cost structure, and that therefore your labor cost advantage was being dissipated by virtue of paying much higher prices, and so you've embraced the market solution here. A question we have from the audience is, and I think for both you and Dr. Melgar to address is, will Mexico be able to avoid the regulatory gridlock? And then parens, by that they mean multiple agencies with overlapping jurisdiction to make the energy reform successful. So you could go right to that.
Well, on the electric side, I think we have a big advantage. When you look at the U.S., many of the decisions are made at the state level. So that's good for innovation, for experimentation, but it also causes 50 different sets of rules.
We know something about that in this country.
Yep.
50 different.
And a lot of policies you just can't roll out on a national level because the decisions have to be made locally. In Mexico, the power is a lot more centralized at the federal level. So all of those decisions about the renewable policy, rate making is made in one place. And I think that makes it easier to harmonize. In particular, one thing that isn't consistent in the U.S. is the portfolio standard. Now, some states are very aggressive, very left-leaning. Others don't want to have much to do with it. In Mexico, it's one decision, and we've already made it. We've got a clean energy portfolio standard that I think is pretty aggressive. We've set it at 5% new clean energy, so that'll get us from 20 where we are now to 25 in 2018, and we'll be able to keep moving that standard up. It applies nationally over the next couple years.
Great. Dr. Melgar, yesterday you told us a little bit about importing natural gas to help address the phase out or the displacement of coal. One question I have is that's a good interim solution. It makes sense, and certainly U.S. producers are happy because we need more markets beyond our borders. But one of the questions in my mind is there's also a pretty strong geologic indication that the Eagleford play that went to 1 million barrels a day and a whole lot of gas associated with that in a very short period of time, a matter of about 2.5 years, in the U.S., probably does extend into Mexico. Do your plans include developing a degree of self-sufficiency on that? And if so, in what kind of time frame, and how does that fit in the priorities?
Sure. Or very quickly, Mexico decided to take the move to combined cycles in the 1990s, and at that time our imports of natural gas were only 3% of our consumption. Currently we import over 30% of the natural gas we consume, both for electricity generation as well as for industry. The switch was not from coal to natural gas, but from fuel oil. fuel oil to natural
you.
gas,
I do remember
fuel oil
that.
and diesel. And
I
of
confused
course,
it with one other one.
as you know, fuel oil, and especially when we had $100 a barrel, was 4 times more expensive than natural gas, and of course, many, more than double the emissions. So it makes sense, and we are viewing natural gas as a transition fuel in Mexico. And one important thing is, yesterday I mentioned that we have a carbon tax on hydrocarbons, with the exception of natural gas. Natural gas at this stage is exempted because precisely we want to make sure that we can move rapidly to natural gas and then, start also the transition to other sources of energy. But of course, if we look at the map of resources, of potential resources, in terms of natural gas, non-conventional natural gas, Mexico is almost on an equal footing as Canada, and the United States has a little bit more. So developing our non-conventional resources is important to us, but we want to do it in a sustainable manner. And part of what we have been doing is working closely with the United States, with the agencies, cooperation with the United States, specifically with Texas, and with Canada, specifically with Alberta, to learn from the experience as to how to do this in a manner that we protect the environment and do good usage of water, etc. The other thing is, in the areas where we have these resources, there is no infrastructure nowadays. I mean, take, for instance, the state of Coahuila. All the development plans were geared towards southern part of Coahuila, where all the resources are in the northern part towards the border. So they had to redirect all the investments in terms of, highways, roads, even communities, etc., to have the infrastructure. The fact that we have low oil prices right now is something that is delaying our original plans. But we are, at the same time, we're viewing this as an opportunity, because what we're doing is we're designing pilot projects to start presenting bids for non-conventionals, where we can work with the agencies, with the appropriate agencies, with industry, with the participants, with the contractors, to make sure that we have the appropriate regulation in the appropriate way to develop these resources.
Great. I want to switch for a moment for a question for both Michael and perhaps for Gitane to address it as well. In the off chance that a Republican becomes the U.S. president in 2017, would Canada and Alberta be open to a revisit of the Keystone XL, or has it been overtaken by the events, if you will, the addressing of climate change and other issues?
I'd say 2 things to that. The first is that for Canada, the most important relationship we have in the world is with the United States. And part of the best practice of people in leadership of public policy in Canada to maintain that good relationship is that we never speculate on electoral outcomes in the United States. And
That's why I referred to it as an off chance.
So I'm going to keep that best practice, and I'm going to offer no speculation or comment on any future electoral outcome in the United States. Now, if you switch to a pipeline, what I would say is that Canada sees Canada fundamentally didn't agree with the end result of the result. We respect the fact that it's the United States' decision. If the United States were to revisit that decision, I think that is something that Canada would welcome, because we would see that as advancing this integrated North American energy infrastructure. And the more interconnections we have, the more resilient we are for whatever future crazy shock is going to come down the pipes. And remember, it wasn't that long ago when, at the early stages of the tight oil revolution in the United States, where the entire North American oil transportation system was horribly clogged. All the pipelines were running in the wrong direction, right, because of the change. So the more we have these connections, the more we are able to kind of reverse things, the more resilient we are. So we would welcome the opportunity to revisit that, should it happen.
And perhaps it might be looked at in the context of an alternative West Coast or East Coast connectivity to the oceans.
I think that's a good point. There is a push in Canada to look at projects that bring oil to both of the West and the East Coast. And In fact, one of the early actions of the government of Canada was to, it really committed two things. One is to move ambitiously on a climate change agenda, and the second is to strengthen the regulatory process in order to ensure it instills public confidence. And it's already made interim changes to the regulatory process with the view of ensuring that these projects to Tidewater in Canada get a fair hearing that addresses things like upstream GHG emissions, ensures that the views of Indigenous peoples are fully taken into account. And so there's a lot of energy, no pun intended, in ensuring that there are adequate reviews of these projects in order to be in a position to decide whether or not to proceed with them as something that is or is not in the national interest of Canada.
Gitane, I was impressed by the comments you made about the coming of a carbon tax in Canada, well ahead of what any discussion here in the United States, and it's all in the context of that. Would you like to add anything more on that or other subjects?
Well, I would just maybe adding to what Michael said, not predicting an outcome of an election, but Alberta will continue to very actively work to debunk the myth that our oil is dirty. I think the action we're taking on climate change is key to that. As Michael said, I think it makes eminent sense to continue the integration of North America, both from a North American security standpoint. I mean, when you look at Canada sits on the third largest proven oil reserves in the world. We're the third largest exporter of oil in the world. And if you look at the other top two countries, being Saudi Arabia and Russia, from an American or Mexican standpoint, if you're going to be importing oil, you have to question where you'd like that to come from. So we're confident that the steps we're taking on climate change will help to reset that conversation. In Alberta as well, we have a very strong regulator in addition to the changes that are being made federally. Just the fact that Mexico did a study worldwide and looked at best-in-class regulators and chose to partner with Alberta, I think that speaks strongly in terms of the confidence that there is in the quality of our regulation. And we, in fact, had an instance this summer where, unfortunately, there was a pipeline leak, and our provincial regulator stepped in and shut the operator down until they could prove that they were compliant and that the appropriate environmental protections were in place. So we see that as very important, and important to continue this discussion about how we get our resources to market.
You've done a great job actually anticipating a question from a student here, and there's one word I couldn't read real well, but I'll try to fill it in. What plans does Canada have in terms of, I think it's utilization, but it's maybe something from the oil sands, and what does the government intend to do about the massive investment in that area? So you've really, I think the point I've heard is it's not off the table. It's a question how to do it in the most responsible, environmentally responsible manner, and to do it very thoughtfully in terms of perhaps the pace of exploitation as well.
For Alberta, it's not a question of either or, right? We are very proud of our energy resource. We're very proud of the fact that it's what's really built our province and has been a huge economic engine for all of Canada. The way Canada works, we have a system of an equalization system whereby all provinces are guaranteed a certain minimum level of social services, and those provinces that are more prosperous, some of those monies through a more complicated fiscal arrangements get transferred to other regions. And the growth of the energy sector in Alberta has been key to Canada's prosperity for many years. So we're very proud of our energy sector, and it's going to remain a cornerstone of our economy. That said, we know that the world is changing, and so we are going to be a responsible player in that. And beyond oil and gas, both conventional and unconventional, we are very, very blessed in Alberta when it comes to geography. We have an abundance of wind, solar, and in fact in Edmonton, my hometown, we have the world's first waste to biofuel facility, which is people from around the world are coming to look at it and looking at applications around the world. China in particular is keenly interested. So we see that there's lots of opportunities there, not backing away from the oil sands. We really do believe we can drive down the emissions per barrel, but looking at other clean tech opportunities as well.
Great, thank you. Sure.
There is an intense effort underway in Canada now among all of the provincial and the federal governments to craft a plan on climate change that will allow Canada to meet its commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and possibly even increase those commitments. And in the development of that plan and that intense effort, there is part of it is a reconciliation of the continued development of our energy industry while meeting our climate change obligations. and significant advances in technology and environmental performance in the oil sands and upstream oil and gas is going to be hardwired into that. The absolute emission cap that Alberta put in place, the $30 carbon tax, you're going to see both of those things work together in a positive way. And that's a top priority in Canada. At the same time we're doing that and we're making the oil sands and LNG industry part of a dramatically improved overall national climate change performance, you're seeing major developments in hydro. There's a massive hydro development coming on in Labrador on the East Coast. There's a massive development in northern BC. Both of those are under construction. Canada's already, we duke it out with Brazil between whether we're second, who's second and who's third in total hydro production. We're ramping it up. And we have an electricity grid that's 80% clean now, and we're shutting down the coal. We're bringing on more hydro. So we are making the numbers add up here to allow us to be a serious energy producer and a leading climate change performer.
Great. That anticipated the next question I had for you. So it was an eye-opener to me to how much more of an east-west balance there is in Canada on energy by virtue of the hydro role. Dr. Melgar, could you give us a little more perspective on the Deepwater agreement and how that might work between the U.S. and Mexico on the border we share, where there's quite a bit of prospectivity for deepwater oil development in the Gulf of Mexico? I think that's something that's kind of gone under the radar screen in the U.S., but I suspect it may be an important answer to the question of the inevitable ongoing declines in the Canderel field.
Sure. If I may just make a brief comment about the past conversation. In Mexico, we're also looking at east-west interconnections, not just north-south. And not only, not only within Mexico, of course, but within the border with the United States, a lot of more crossings. We're seeing this possibility just from the interconnections that are being already planned and developed in gas pipelines and also in electricity. To get to your question about deep water, part of the reason we needed to have an energy reform was because Pemex didn't have the technology, the know-how, and of course the financial backing to do the exploration and production in deep waters and ultra deep waters. Mexico has a lot of resources there. And if you look at a map of where the activity is right now in the United States, you would see that a lot of the developments are close to the Mexican border. So Mexico had already had for over the past 15, 16 years concerns about transboundary fields and whether the U.S. would eventually be getting Mexican oil from those transboundary fields. So we had already negotiated agreements. We have one agreement from the year 2000 and another one from 2012 to cover the entire border to make sure that we can protect Mexican oil. But the thing is, we didn't even have the know-how or the legal framework to be able to get into agreements with those companies. I mentioned yesterday that we had a round one where we've been implementing different bids. We presented last December what is considered the most important bid, which is for exploration and extraction in deep and ultra-deep waters in the Gulf of Mexico. And this bid was already announced. The data room is open. We have already 15 companies that have signed up for it. Of course, you're seeing the major companies, the Shells, the Exxons, but also some other players that are interested in going into consortiums that will be bidding for this. Because of the collapse of oil prices, we haven't defined exactly the date of the bid. We will be announcing it in the third quarter of this year, and we will have, once we announce the date, will have to be 90 days after that day that we choose. So we foresee that we will have this bid either at the end of this year, most likely at the beginning of next year. But the important thing, and I'm getting to your point, is that our reform was based on the concept of sustainability, making sure that we follow international best practices, and of course that we align ourselves mostly to what is being done in the US and in Canada. So there has been a lot of cooperation between CNH, our upstream regulator, and BSEE and BOEM, CNH and ASEA with Bessie and Boehm, and we are basically making sure that whichever company comes to Mexico, that they don't think that they're going to find a lower bar. The bar is either, it will be equal and competitive as it is in the United States and Canada for EMP activities.
Jeff, one other question. Is there a role for LNG imports in your electrification expansion plans? And if so, could you speak to that? And then we'll do a roundup shortly because we're down to just under 5 minutes now.
Sure. Well, it's going to depend on the prices. You know, right now, LNG is set on a international market, so the prices are a lot higher than it is for imported gas direct from Texas. So right now, I don't think we'd be making new investments. But you know, in a long-term strategy, it is good to diversify. So I think in the long term, it could be. But for now, we'll have to, yeah, go.
I'd just like to add, because this is an issue having to do with natural gas planning. We are increasing under this administration 7 points of interconnection with the U.S. By the end of the administration, we will be importing, which is 2018, 2019, we'll be importing 9 BCFs, but Mexico also has natural gas. So as we start developing our potential, meeting our internal demand, we have plans to export to Central America, and we have plans, and these are already under work, strengthening our ports to be able to establish also LNG plants in Mexico to be exporters of natural gas. So I think that's one of the variables we have to keep in mind, and I will make a very brief comment. I think energy is really transforming the role of North America, even at a geopolitical level. The fact that today we're thinking of a U.S. as an oil exporter, the fact that eventually Mexico could also become a gas exporter, I mean, the whole region is completely changing not only the energy setting, but the geopolitical setting in the world.
I agree with you. I think it's a very dynamic time, and one of the things that goes on the cost is there's some new approaches to LNG delivery, and I think it'll be particularly true in North America, where the cost structure actually is still going to come down even more. It's been capital intensive and long lead time and so on, but there are ways in which the advancing technology will begin to address that. We're down to a relatively few minutes, so what I'd like to do is go back to what I suggested at the beginning. One of the things I've been struck by, and it may reflect more my ignorance or something, but I know you've had lots of dialogue with the current administration. We're going to change administrations, as each of your countries have, and whether I would like just an observation or two about the durability of what's being put in place in terms of the dialogue vis-a-vis not predicting the outcome, but just simply presuming there's an embracing of it or not an embracing of it, because clearly this has happened rather spontaneously with real effort on the part of both of your countries. And as I perceive it, it's somewhat in abeyance while we go through the result of elections, which is policy change very often. And in this particular case, there's reasons, I think, to be optimistic on that, but maybe reasons to say that the U.S. may not move as quickly as you all have indicated. So could I start with Jeff and just come this way with about a half a minute to a minute comment by each, and we'll wrap up.
Well, I think that the integration brings benefits that are not politically charged. Who doesn't want cheaper energy? Who doesn't want cleaner energy?
Yep.
So I don't think the outcome of the election will affect the trajectory.
And reliability.
Yep.
Yep.
I'd say governments play a role in facilitating the dialogue, but I think there are already enough business being taken place that business, private sector, academia are playing a very important role in this movement, so I would hope that it would keep on rolling.
As a number of the things we heard yesterday reinforce. Yes, Virginia.
Yeah, I would say democracy is wonderful. It's also complicated and results in change, which is exciting and challenging at the same time. But the reality is the economic fundamentals don't change. The environmental reality doesn't change. So it may take a little bit of time as our governments get up to speed, but I'm still optimistic.
Alberta's acceptance of a big change was very instructive from my standpoint.
Whatever the outcome of the next American federal election, the reality is we have to strike while the iron's hot, because there's about 6 months left before the senior part of the U.S. administration goes into transition mode, right? And I think we're right now poised where we can make really good use of that 6 months in terms of moving these working groups along and establishing these mechanisms. Then there will be a transition. We'll see what happens. I think after that, though, the underlying logic of it will carry it along. The election, a different administration will change things for sure, but and will change how things are structured, et cetera. But the underlying logic here, I'm confident, is going to carry forward in some manner what may come in terms of the decision of U.S. voters in November.
I think Dan Richter's panel yesterday, you all made that point as well, and I appreciate it very much. Could we have a hand for our panels? Thank you all.